Hello, hello, hello. I want to officially go ahead and welcome everybody over to the stream. My goodness, do we have so many brand new, fascinating comic book previews, really big, X-Men projects being announced, and just so many exciting stories to go ahead and touch on today. It feels like the Marvel Universe just has so many aspects to it, and there is just so much information to go ahead and cover from everything to the latest developments over for the Black Widow and her symbiote, extending to some intrigue regarding the Marvel Universe. Plus, we even have a look at some of the first pages of a brand new DC Comics crossover with the Titans being Beast World. And we're also going to go ahead and take a look at some brand new previews for comics like X-Men Red, Uncanny Spider-Man. Oh boy. Today is just going to be so much fun here. I just want to recap some of the videos we dropped over on the channel. I believe on Tuesday, we came out with the Supergirl special. That was such a great comic. Just such excellent writing from Mariko Tamaki and wonderful art from Skylar Patridge. We also had X-Men 28 over on Wednesday. Let me tell you now, if you aren't reading the main X-Men series, it is so much fun over from Marvel. I think X-Men 28 was just phenomenal too. Really seeing Firestar attempt to operate undercover alongside Orcus and watching her navigate that really tense political climate that's going on there was so good. You know, with stories like Sins of Sinister, Marvel has really fleshed out the Orcus side of the universe. So when they create stories that feature characters like Firestar going undercover, there's just so much, political implications, so many interesting plot threads that kind of percolate throughout the entire line. You've got to go ahead and check out not only our video review, but that issue too. Venom 27 was also nothing short of just being absolutely fantastic. Really seeing Natasha get her brand new symbiote and operate alongside Eddie Brock's son Dylan is so much fun. Watching them try and rescue Bren, I think, is just a really intriguing story scenario that was written so well over at the publisher. Let's see what else we got. We also had the distinct pleasure of finally getting the much hypes, the much sought after Ultimate Universe issue 1. I thought that issue was just amazing. I thought Jonathan Hickman did a fantastic job paring down some of his dialogue and introducing some just really beautiful story scenarios over in that comic book. Seeing the new team of heroes rise up was incredibly enthralling here, and hopefully it'll set the stage for some upcoming Ultimate Comics titles. Another really fun aspect about the Ultimate Universe #1 issue 2 is how it sets up some of the other Ultimate Comics over in the line. My name is Arakko Braddock, and I want to welcome you over to our stream today. As we mentioned up top here, we have so many news stories. There's not really a convention in sight or anything, but we still have some really important news announcements set to really mark, I think, the end of the Krakoan era of comics. I am just so thrilled to be able to speak to you today about all of these different books. It just feels like right now, aside from maybe video games, comic books are absolutely my favorite medium, and really getting the chance to share some of my enthusiasm over on this stream with you is just a distinct pleasure. Without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at some brand new variant covers coming in over from Marvel's Stormbreakers. This was published earlier this week over on November 3rd, coming in from Marvel.com. These are really New Year's covers. Celebrated from the Marvel Stormbreakers, as mentioned earlier. These are some just really fantastic up-and-coming artists over at Marvel. I really loved some of Jan Bazaldua's work across Marvel too. I really love the personality that Bazaldua lends over to some of the figures. I think this cover with Ghost Rider is so much fun, with him wearing these really kind of silly 2024 glasses. Ghost Rider is such a serious character. Getting the chance to see him celebrate with such a bold line, with such an interesting figure, I think is so much fun. All right, let me go ahead and do my magic and work Marvel's website to see if we can enlarge some of these pictures here. Here, let's see if this worked right now. Ooh, it did. It did. Perfect. Okay, so this is a Ghost Rider 21 cover from Gian Bazaldua. And we also have a cover coming in over from Martin Kokolo. Martin Kokolo, really phenomenal artist. Once again, great at drawing characters, going in with more jovial expressions in some of these lines here, too. Absolutely love the way that Daredevil's Billy Clubs are kind of just circling around and introducing so much dimension and complexity over to the cover. Also, really love how Kokolo manages to get those strong expressions over from his figures, too. Yes, this cover I think is so beautiful here, coming in over from CF Via. Such a strong artist at Marvel, having lent work over to comic books like The Avengers. I think the relationship between Tony Stark and Emma Frost is so interesting right now in the Marvel Universe. Having a cover referencing their relationship, super interesting. Also, I really hope that this relationship continues into 2024. I feel like Tony Stark and Emma Frost is good both for the X-Men and the Iron Man properties. So until writers like Jerry Dugan have exhausted all the story scenarios, I really want to see what else Marvel has in store for this couple. Once again, amazing cover from CFVIA. I think this is one of my favorites out of all these pieces, especially because of the continuity implications. Okay, Nick Klein, also another really, really phenomenal artist, having led just such beautiful work over to the Thor property. While this cover is a lot sillier, I still think the amount of lines, the amount of characters here, very, very enthralling. Plus, I love the kind of status quo and setting over with this cover too, with these kind of characters playing what looks to be rock music here. Really interesting stuff. Elena Casagrande. This is one of the Stormbreakers who I'm, least familiar with, but every time I see some of Casagrande's art, just looks absolutely enthralling. I think Emma Frost is such an intriguing character right now because of the position over in the X-Men franchise. I feel like Emma Frost is probably more desperate than she has been in a long time due to the really violent attacks over from Orcus. And I think this cover just captures the pathos over in her personality through some of the visuals alone, even though it kind of plays up the fact that Emma Frost is definitely a materialist and loves some of these individual items too. Yeah, really stunning work from Casagrande. This cover from Federico Vicentini is very interesting. Vicentini, a very expressive artist, as opposed to somebody like Casagrande, who is really trying to, make sure that every line looks so clean and so bold. But the more I get used to some of the expressive nature of Vicentini's art, the more I appreciate what he renders over on the page here. I think all these kind of six X-Men assembled over for a selfie is posed incredibly well. I think this is just a really bold and beautiful cover. And I think the inclusion of characters over like Jean Grey is really fascinating. However, I do think that maybe this is a little bit out of continuity because if we were in the core X-Men continuity, I don't think any of these Marvel Universe characters would very much appreciate taking a picture over with Beast. But still, absolutely beautiful cover. Another thing to note about the inclusion of Beast here that's a little weird is these Krakoan costumes look pretty modern for some of these characters too. Okay, we also have a cover from Chris Allen. Chris Allen, I really like among the Stormbreakers, but I did have a chance to take a look at some of these covers last night. And I think that some of the likeness over for Shang-Chi here is very strange in terms of the facial details. That being said, I am always impressed with the amount of detail Chris Allen lends to some of the backgrounds. I feel like in terms of like modern comic art, a lot of times you'll see really well drawn figures over in the foreground, and then the background is just missing like detail. So the fact that Chris Allen is able to evoke all these disparate elements, really cool here. I also love how Shang-Chi has this outline too. I feel like it adds a little bit more dimension over to the cover and creates more of a contrast between the foreground and background. If only some of the details on the face were patched up a little bit more, I think this cover would have been incredible. Lucas Wernick. I love Lucas Wernick. I think Lucas Wernick is so good at drawing figures that look so precise, that have so much detail, but at the same time, they render a lot of expression. getting to see Matthew and Elektra really share a drink during a New Year's Eve party. Very, very interesting. Love some of the framing, the composition. And I also think that these expressions that both Daredevil and Elektra have are just really, really tremendous here. The only thing I can really say in critique is I do think that some of these limbs are probably exaggerated in terms of the anatomy, but with so much precision in all these different elements of the cover, I am definitely more than willing to look that by. And I just think too that this is a really intriguing cover over for the Daredevil gang war here. While it's definitely out of continuity and not related over to that book, I still think that all these Stormbreaker variant covers are pretty actually amazing over from Marvel right now. A lot of these artists are illustrating some of my favorite books at the publisher, whether it be CF Via on the main Avengers series. I really like some of what Jan Bazaldua has done over on Red Goblin. And I think Nick Klein, such a fantastic and detailed artist. We're definitely going to be talking more about these Stormbreakers in the very near future, and I hope you enjoyed previewing some of these covers over with us too. All right, I want to go ahead and break our format today. I want to do something a little bit different, something that's going to be really, really exciting over to me. I actually want to start out with some previews. So we are going to go ahead and talk about a really, really big comic book in terms of the X-Men franchise. And this one is, I think, one of the most complicated, one of the most nuanced to experience. This is X-Men Red issue 17. Of course, this series takes place over on Arakko, the X-Men's terraformed version of Mars. And currently, there's a massive Genesis war going on in this series as Apocalypse's former wife, Genesis, is waging a massive war against some of the forces of Storm and the rest of these characters. We're finally getting the last stages over in the Genesis War and some upcoming issues of X-Men Red. Plus, I think one of the most interesting things right now about like the entire X-Men franchise as a whole is the fact that Apocalypse keeps showing up in all these disparate comic books. We've saw him showing up in X-Men Red, X-Men, and Immortal X-Men. So the fact that he's popping up over in X-Men Red again, I think is actually a pretty subversive way to introduce this character. Even though the main conflict with Apocalypse definitely takes place in X-Men Red, the amount of editorial just passing of this character, I think, has gotten me even more intrigued to check out this latest chapter of the series. Without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into one of the most complicated and nuanced books in Marvel's entire publishing line with X-Men Red 17. Apocalypse Now. When Genesis returned to Arakko, she brought war in her wake. What will her husband bring with him? This issue, Apocalypse returns. Storm holds the ultimate weapon in her grip, but in the face of En Sabah, even that may not be enough. Looks like X-Men Red 17, written by Al Ewing, featuring art from Yildiray Cinar, and that cover was from Stefano Caselli and Jesus Abertov. Yildiray Cinar has really been lending some gorgeous work over across X-Men Red. Absolutely love this cover where we're introduced over to Gabriel Summers' Vulcan. He's really shown up in so many different contexts across the X-Men Red series, and seeing him reintroduced back into the narrative, I think towards the end of the Genesis War, is really enthralling. Also, the way that Cinar has rendered this page has actually portrayed Vulcan to be like smaller on the page than I would have guessed. And I think it just creates a lot of interesting intrigue and a great sense of perspective in page design. And we have a much wordier page that also shows just how talented Cinar is at depicting some of these characters and building up tension between the individual figures here. I really want to read off this speech from Apocalypse. I think it's really poignant and sets up some of the destination over for X-Men Red. No, Gabriel Summers, you are not on any level. In times past, I ordained my chosen warriors with the names of those I had lost, and wrote their names in blood in the sacred texts of humankind. But now is a time for older concepts. Had my family understood my path, this would be a simple matter. But it is happening, as it must. It is happening now, and I do not need a new death. I need to be the fire to be fire. but fire is only useful when harnessed, so you will remain bound to me and bound by my will. Obligation is a useful ingredient in the old magics, and their confines will teach you restraint. Yeah, I just think in terms of the pros that Apocalypse has, there's just so much gravitas over to his character, and Sinar just captures the most interesting facial details over for Apocalypse 2. These panel bleeds are so beautiful with Apocalypse's legs kind of shooting over towards that next panel on the page. And we really have just this one final page to go ahead and kick things off. I want to read this last piece of text over from Apocalypse, and that'll wrap up our preview over on X-Men Red. So Gabriel says, "No, I will not simmer, I will burn. You may have freed me from my prison, but..." We have Apocalypse chiming in here saying, "Yes, the oubliette you strained against for months, which you well deserve, destroyer of worlds, I tore easily with bare hands. A small challenge, Mysterium was brought into this plane as a coin, base metal imprinted to the material world and its material laws. I would have made it a sword of holy fire." Yeah, it seems like across so many different X-Men comics, we keep returning to the idea of the Mysterium. Once again, I'm glad that all these X-Men issues are really in sync with each other. Also, I'm so happy that this character is back over from that Apocalypse one-shot. I think Marvel's editorial has just done a great job carrying the continuity across all these disparate X-Men books. And towards some of these final panels, I think where we leave off in terms of this preview is really fascinating, as some of these characters are really discussing Storm. They're saying, "I'm guessing the storm's in the air." We have Apocalypse saying, "No, Aurora is not a mere ingredient in the magic. Aurora is the magic." And yeah, Storm is the main character of X-Men Red. Even when she's not present over on the page, I feel like her presence is still felt here. So just getting a reference over from Apocalypse to Storm, I think is just a phenomenal way to go ahead and end this preview. Once again, the page layouts from Sinar are just amazing. This page has a bleed, and it has these really interesting panel borders, plus, more bleeds too. The way that this panel is shaped really gets me immersed in terms of the narrative. I think the craft over in X-Men Red is phenomenal. This is still among one of my very favorite X-Men comics published month after month. And even though this is a really dense title, I just can't recommend it enough. I think it's an incredibly subversive, really interesting book. If you're reading it in tandem with all the X-Men comics, you're going to be in for something really special. All right, let's see what else we have in store for today. We also have another really big comic book, a comic book that I continue to cover like each and every week it comes out. But we're actually going to go ahead and talk a little bit about this upcoming issue of the Uncanny Spider-Man. This is issue 3. So, in the last chapter, we got so many subversive story elements with Spider Man, or the Uncanny Spider Man Kurt, battling against the Orcus powered Rhino. Plus, we also had Nightcrawler enter a rendezvous over with a Spider Man villain known as Silver Sable. In fact, this encounter even turned romantic towards the end of the issue, but Kurt went ahead and was able to detach from some of his feelings in order to address the Orcus Rhino threat here. The way that Kurt has been working alongside, Peter Parker, our version of Spider-Man, I think has also been really enthralling. Without further ado, let's go ahead and check in on how Nightcrawler is battling some of the forces of Orcus in Uncanny Spider-Man issue 3. Release the Hounds. Silver Sable's commission heats up. Nightcrawler's a slippery devil, and he's not about to surrender and let Orcus continue to terrorize New York City. Plus, he's not too keen on the whole murder all mutants plan, as Sable signed up for a gig she can't play. And when Orcus realizes her heart's not in the game, who will they send in to finish the job? All right, so Uncanny Spider-Man issue 3, written over by Cy Spurrier, and I see over on Marvel's cover for issue 3, we have Javier Pina credited over as the artist with colors from Matt Milla. I think that some of these pages for Uncanny Spider-Man have been so beautiful, introducing all these elements of panel bleeds, really an interesting sense of shading for some of these characters. Also, Matt Miller's colors across this preview are really bold, really beautiful, as you're going to see as we continue to scroll through some of these Uncanny Spider-Man pages. I love how the threat of Orcus is present on almost each and every page over in this book as we get introduced to what looks like a deviant character washing up over on New York City, and immediately Orcus sends in these Stark Sentinels to try and go ahead and stop it here. But the really subversive element of this Uncanny Spider-Man chapter is the way that Nightcrawler, over with his Hope Sword, manages to really spoil the show here and do battle over with this deviant character. Once again, this page is colored. It's illustrated so incredibly well with so much precision and introduces such an interesting element of texture and dimension. I just love how there's a panel bleed over with this villainous character, and plus the way that the Uncanny Spider-Man is just using his Hope Sword, which is almost like ricocheting across the page, is just so stunning. It's so just absolutely beautiful here. Also, really like the perspective shift with the smaller Nightcrawler over on this final panel, introducing just a really silly and irreverent quote. He's saying, "Delay your land-loving sea dogs. Get ye back to Davy Jones where ye belong." Even though some of Nightcrawler's quips have been really bad across Uncanny Spider-Man, I do think the fact that he's even trying and he's failing over on the page is very, very funny. Cy Spurrier doesn't write all of Nightcrawler's lines to be just hilarious, rip-roaring, pieces of laughter, but sometimes they're just meant to be irreverent and strange asides, adding a little bit more color to this series. I love how this next page really dials up the threat of Orcus. We just had Nightcrawler trying to help out Orcus, and immediately some of their forces are trying to attack him. Over on this next page, we can see Nightcrawler saying, "Say no to bad drugs," and trying to bamf out of the way. But some of these forces here are relentless over with their lasers or just weapons in general. And really intriguingly, we're also introduced to the fact that some of these kind of Orcus agents are spearheaded by Nimrod. This is a character over from, House of X and Powers of 10 that is just instrumental across the entire X-Men comic book line. I am just such a big fan with how so many of these titles link up in such interesting ways to other aspects of the X-Men universe. In all these disparate Fall of X titles, it's like we're introduced to one individual piece of Orcus. And then when you kind of take all these X-Men books and put them together, you can actually get a really good litmus test as to who some of the worst Orcus agents are and where some of these individual characters are. So just amazing art, amazing page designs on almost every single one of these Uncanny Spider-Man 3 pages. I am still really, really transfixed over with this series. I think this series has taken on some really interesting plot elements, and I just love the idea of a Nightcrawler comic book kind of masquerading as Spider-Man, which is tied into all these disparate aspects of X-Men comics. All right, really hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the preview for Uncanny Spider-Man issue 3. This one is set to be released over on November 8th. And yeah, we'll have more coverage as this series continues here. All right, let's go ahead and talk about well, first off, I just want to go ahead and take a moment to acknowledge Nobody Except Me. Happy Saturday. I hope you're enjoying the stream, Nobody Except Me. Thank you so much for stopping by here. All right, so this next story I think is going to be very controversial, very interesting. We've done a lot of coverage over on some recent Jonathan Hickman comic books. This next one, I think, is one of the most controversial period right now. We're actually going to go ahead and take a look at the follow-up chapter to Gods issue 2. It looks like Adventures in Poor Taste has a preview for us. Of course, this comic book still written from Jonathan Hickman, featuring art from Valerio Schiti, colors from Marte Gracia. This series had a great creative team. Our problem with the first chapter of this really hyped up issue of Gods was just the fact that some of the dialogue between the characters of Win and Aiko Maki read like some of Jonathan Hickman's kind of personal diatribe instead of being a really big and bombastic superhero narrative. That being said, though, after I critiqued the first issue for some of those dialogue elements, we had a chance over in one of our streams to check out all the backstory behind Gods, and I was just mystified with how much work Jonathan Hickman and Marvel's, let's see if I can speak today, editorial lent towards just building the backdrop over in the narrative here. And I definitely think it encourages me to go ahead and give Gods as many chances as possible before I just can't read it anymore. However, I think my tolerance hasn't been exhausted yet. Let's go ahead and check out the second issue of the series and see if we can find anything interesting to latch on to. Let's take a look at some of Jonathan Hickman's narrative, especially in terms of some of his prose, and see if he's kind of pared it down at all. I think also these covers from Mateus Manhanini are nothing short of beautiful. Aiko Maki and Mia the Magic Girl, two really, really interesting characters that actually have a cool scene over in our preview. Nobody except me. I'm liking the new character designs, just wondering how long they will stick around once Hickman moves on. I am so worried about that because of the reception over to the first issue. I wish everybody just had a great time over with that first chapter, but because of some of the dialogue, I'm a little bit trepidatious. However, let's go ahead and take a look and see what we can learn about this upcoming Gods project with the second issue. Jonathan Hickman and Valerio Schiti continue to redefine the Marvel cosmology. The Centum normally has 25 primes, now only 3 remain. College isn't worth the time or money. There's a hidden book in the hidden library that hides a hidden door. Cubis Core is from Georgia, like that matters. And Gons issue 2, still written by Hickman, featuring art from Schiti. We already said there's colors from Marte Gracia, letters from VC's Travis Lanham, and of course that cover was from Mateus Manhanini. The powers that be and the natural order of things are two of the forces that shape all of existence. Their mortal avatars and apprentices roam the earth, working together in an ancient truce, an uneasy alliance of science and magic. Win, avatar of the powers that be, and Aiko, a centaur of the natural order of things, were once married, but now find themselves working at cross purposes. The proto-mage Cubis Core, armed with the staff of the living tribunal, reappeared after a long absence and violently opened the Prometheus pits. This action, known as the Babylon event, was Cubis Core's first step in attempting to free his master and elder god. A group of heroes, scientists, and magic users, including Doctor Strange, Win and Aiko Maki, teamed up and managed to defeat Cubis Core. Just wanted to say here that some of Marvel's recap pages are so beautiful, they're so well designed, and they just have so much information. Let's go ahead and give a quick shout out over to Jay Bowen. In terms of some of the design for these pages, I wish more DC comics had these really nice recap pages that the Marvel books have. All right, once again, the colors from Marte Gracia, the line over from Valerio Schiti across Gods is just so majestic, so beautiful. I think Schiti is once again one of those artists who's able to find just a beautiful line across these pages. I am so amazed with the second panel. The way the panel is framed and all the detail in the background is just gorgeous. Afro SF, welcome aboard to our stream today. Greetings, Arakko Brannock. Hickman's dialogue in prose has been given a new name, Hickmanism. This word will describe his style. Let's see how much Hickmanism is present over in this chapter of Gods. The world almost ended, and all we are left with is the mystery of him. Brother Voodoo, a mystery we must solve. First, a delving. And we have Clea saying yes, and then the road will open before us, one that must be followed wherever it leads. A moment, please, Doctor Strange says. I really actually like this exchange. It's very small, but we have Doctor Strange meeting up with Dimitri. Dimitri, very interesting character in terms of Gods. I think a lot of his dialogue is very understated. And I like the way that Jonathan Hickman writes Doctor Strange when he's not trading some of the most melodramatic dialogue I've ever seen over with Win in the series too. Let's take a look at some of the dialogue and see if it's good, actually. We have Doctor Strange saying, "Your name is Dmitri, yes? Dmitri Krakow? Yeah. I think I understand the reasons behind your undertaking, and I might have pressed to commit to making a choice, even support them. But not in this place, never in this place. Okay, sorry. Think nothing of it now. Where were we?" This last panel with the bleed from Valerio Schiti, really, really gorgeous. And I think at least across this page, a lot of the dialogue here is written with a really strong flow. Let's check out this next image. We actually got a chance to preview this a really long time ago. I think this page from Skeety is like one of the best I've seen in terms of gods here. Just the way it's structured with all these disparate panels is so beautiful here. And it looks like Steven is trying to get the character of Cubus Core to reveal himself, who happens to be over at this meeting. Getting the chance to see some of the reaction shots from the disparate magic users, really interesting. I also am greatly appreciating the cast of characters across gods, extending not only to some of these new characters, but also to people like Wong, Brother Voodoo, Clea, just some of those magic users introduced here. Once again, another just really gorgeous page over from Valerio Schiti, teasing the idea over with the Cubist core. Once again, this is a page that has a lot more dialogue as opposed to some of the previous pages here. Let's go ahead and read a little bit of Doctor Strange's kind of longer diatribe to see what he's saying here. "Your problem, young man, is that you see the world through eyes blinded by science. You believe in peers and colleagues whose work buttresses and one another's. It is institutional and of the academy, not of our world, not of magic. Ours is a solitary journey, and on this path your eyes cannot be opened by others. You must open them yourself. Magicians don't have peers or colleagues, and we most certainly do not have friends." Okay. I think in terms of some of the sentences here, I feel like Doctor Strange is once again being a little bit too melodramatic. He's not extending his personality that far, but I'm definitely getting some inklings that he might be a little bit more arrogant than as opposed to how he's depicted in some other comics. For instance, when we have him saying, "Magicians don't have peers or colleagues, and we most certainly do not have friends." Well, you're married. I think you do have friends. I think a lot of people really, really like you. So I just don't know why you're being so melodramatic today in terms of some of your presence. Overall, though, I think from some of the from some of the preview pages we've seen so far, this looks to be an intriguing issue. This last page over with Mia the Magic Girl and Aiko Maki, I think, is just really, really beautiful over at Columbia University. And I think some of the prose is also pretty understated here. We have Aiko saying, "Excuse me, you seem to have dropped something. Here you go." We have Mia saying thanks. And it's some sort of card, maybe introducing her to Aiko Maki's sense of the fight over at Marvel. So I would say that based on some of these preview pages we've seen so far, this does look to be an improvement on what we've seen in past Gods issues. The one thing I think Jonathan Hickman really needs to look out for is getting maybe another, editing pass over on some of Doctor Strange's dialogue. I think the way that Doctor Strange carries himself here maybe carries a little bit too much melodrama as opposed to what you can see in the main series over from Jed McKay or how he's been characterized in other comics. But geez, just for some of the background, some of Valerio Schiti's art, I think this is probably going to still be worth a really big read here. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and have some coverage over on Gods when it releases over on November 8th. Hope you enjoyed all of our coverage over on that series. I think there's a lot of promising aspects about that comic book, but I'm just not sure if Gods is going to be able to deliver in terms of the execution. I'm really enjoying going over some of these previews with you. I actually want to go ahead and touch over on a DC comic that I'm really, really anticipating. This is one that I think introduces all the really fascinating elements of DC's current comic book line. Let's talk a little bit about the upcoming issue of DC Comics Birds of Prey. By the way, if you aren't reading this one, you should be. This series has just a really interesting, really subversive cast of characters. Dinah Lance is trying to save her adopted daughter Sin, and she's recruited just an interesting mix of birds of prey. She's got Harley Quinn, the mainstay, of course, but she also has characters like Big Barda, Zealot over from Wildstorm, and we have Cass Kane too. So just really fantastic team of heroes. Plus, the creative team on this is so good. We have Kelly Thompson in terms of some of the writing. Really have appreciated what Thompson has lent over to Marvel. I think it's pretty fun seeing what she contributes to DC here. Leonardo Romero, just incredible, breathtaking artist, very similar to somebody like Chris Samney. Jordi Belaire's colors. Jordi Belaire colors so many books over at Marvel and DC, but I love the palette she uses. It always opens up in interesting sets of texture. I think this cover is pretty subversive too, with like these orange and red hues over on the page, especially with Wonder Woman's lasso causing so much intrigue in terms of the cover here too. Let's go ahead and preview some of the interiors and read a little bit more about the solicit. The covert first mission of the reformed Birds of Prey has established their beachhead in Themyscira. What could be so important to Black Canary that she'd risk the wrath of the greatest warriors on Earth? Birds of Prey Issue 3, written by Thompson, featuring art from Romero, colors by Jordi Belaire, and letters from Clayton Cowles. So here's a look over at one of the interior preview pages. Just the sense of design of the page from Romero is amazing. I love some of the colors as well, kind of introducing a noir element towards this Birds of Prey storyline. Also, the idea of teasing some of the elements within Themyscira that these birds are about to encounter, I think is just really, really phenomenal here. Love this last panel with the character saying this vessel is unworthy. Once again, just to recap, the kind of core plot of this issue is that we're seeing our main Birds of Prey team try and save the character of Sin over from Themyscira. Over on the next page, we can get to see some of our Birds of Prey characters really discussing their plan of how they're going to enter Themyscira. These birds really need to keep this covert element of their mission intact, so they're unable to use some of their teleportation devices like Big Barda's boom tube. And instead, their plan, which was concocted over from Harley Quinn, was to go ahead and hide in the mouth of a megalodon in order to ride all the way to this Amazonian paradise here. Once again, I think the way that Romero is able to capture these really beautiful designs, these really beautiful, character expressions is so poignant. And I think some of these elements of like this pink and purple kind of sunset hues from Jordi Belaire really tease out this interesting kind of story scenario taking place over at night. On this next page, it really seems like Big Barda is talking about how she might do in a physical battle over against Wonder Woman. Part of the reason why our team is really looking to keep that covert status is because they don't think they're going to be able to battle over against Wonder Woman in earnest, even with the combined might of all their characters. Also, one additional element about this Birds of Prey comic book that's so much fun is that really big status quo element from the first issue of Wonder Woman, where like a rogue Amazonian character killed off so many characters over in a bar. That status quo is playing into Amazon's attack and Birds of Prey, and also seemingly has a big impact over on the DC universe too. This next page, really, really cool. We get to see some of our birds over in the mouth of a megalodon headed over to Themyscira here. The way that they've really kind of latched on to some of this netting and have all this scuba gear, I think is just a great way to depict some of the visuals in the series from Romero. Once again here, the amount of detail, the way these characters are just posed on the page is really amazing and shows that very similar to X-Men Red, this is another comic book that has an exceptionally high level of comic book craft here. And, this final panel over in the issue with Harley Quinn was very cathartic. It feels like a lot of the Birds of Prey have been, what's the word I'm looking for? Very, very hard on Harley. Very, very unjustly kind of negative towards some of her personality and outlook. And Dinah is actually really quick to go ahead and congratulate Harley over for a job well done, which kind of leaves us over on our preview here. This, once again, really interesting, really subversive cast of characters, and really getting the chance to see like such a nuanced character storyline for Harley Quinn was really endearing across this Birds of Prey chapter 2. Romero did such a good job capturing a beautiful expression over for Quinn on this final panel that really just soaked up some of those feelings that Harley feels towards Dinah in this moment of victory that she's been able to snatch up. John Pett, I really love the Roy Lichtenstein vibe in Romero's artwork. Cool vibe for Birds of Prey. Glad to hear that there's a little bit more support over for this book. We're going to have a full review for Birds of Prey coming in over on Tuesday. It's probably going to be one of the only DC comics we cover this week. Just in order to balance some of the time and make sure that we have enough coverage over for some of these God's titles. Really hope you look forward to our full review over for this comic coming very, very soon over on Tuesday. Wow, wow, wow. So those were some of the biggest comic book previews we had to work with. We don't always have time for some of those, and I feel like that's some of the best content because these comic book previews, these are like the latest comics that essentially aren't even released yet. And I love giving commentary on things that are just right about set to come out here. We're actually going to switch gears though and talk about some really, really big news stories. We're going to go ahead and kick things off with an exploration of Marvel's brand new upcoming Moon Knight series. The night is dead, but the Midnight Mission carries on in the new Vengeance of Moon Knight #1 trailer. Following the death of Moon Knight in next month's Moon Knight 30, Jed MacKay and Alessandro Cappuccio launch Vengeance of the Moon Knight #1 in January. So, in terms of this Moon Knight comic book from Jed MacKay and Alessandro Cappuccio, I always have to say that, this is a book that I don't always remember to put towards the beginning, towards the top of my stack as it comes out each month. But I think it's been really consistent in portraying a very strong characterization towards Mark Spector. I think Jed MacKay has just done a great job sticking with this character for the long haul. And I love the fact that he is actually going to be the one writing the Vengeance of the Moon Knight series. Let's read a little bit more about Mark Spector's final moments as he pursues this character of the Black Spectre and actually ends up passing away here, according to some of the information teased over in this news article. Let's check out a little bit more about it right now. Mark Spector's dramatic final moments are currently unfolding in Moon Knight 28 to 30, but writer Jed MacKay and artist Alessandro Cappuccio's mission is far from over. With the new year comes Moon Knight's Vengeance, as the acclaimed creative team's bold era of Moon Knight enters its next phase in Vengeance of the Moon Knight. Fans can get a first look at the death of Moon Knight and what comes in this next all-new Vengeance of the Moon Knight trailer featuring never-before-seen artwork. Another really interesting aspect of this upcoming Moon Knight storyline is the fact that Marvel has not yet revealed who this character is. I know a lot of people right now are theorizing that the new Moon Knight is probably going to be Hunter's Moon, one of the other fists of Khonshu that I think Jed MacKay and Cappuccio have really built up across their Moon Knight run, but Marvel has been teasing this storyline relentlessly and will not give confirmation as to who was ultimately behind the suit. Over the course of 30 issues, MacKay and Cappuccio have revitalized the Moon Knight mythos with the introduction of a new fist of Khonshu, Hunter's Moon, the return of Moon Knight's archenemy Black Spectre, and an exciting new calling for Mark Spector as the Midnight Mission. Now this blockbuster run reaches an explosive turning point as the pieces fall into place for Moon Knight's ultimate demise. When the dust settles, a new avatar of Khonshu's wrath will awaken. This new trailer shows Moon Knight's epic showdown with Black Spectre and teases who will take Moon Knight's place. Complete with a new look and an unquenchable thirst for battle, this mysterious new Moon Knight emerges, a deadly lunar legionnaire for the dark times ahead. Wow, love some of Marvel's copy. Moon Knight is the lunar legionnaire. There you go. You heard it here first. Clad in the black of mourning, the Midnight Mission remains, but who is left to keep the faith, and How have they been changed by the Black Spectre's master stroke? The next chapter of Moon Knight starts here as the congregants of the Midnight Mission pick up the pieces and carry on the mission, and find themselves faced with a mysterious new enemy in eerily familiar vestments. We are not going to see some of the audio from this trailer in fear of Marvel striking this video, but we will watch it without some of the sound on. Okay, so really loving some of the artwork from Capuccio. We're really teasing some of the final moments in the main Moon Knight series right now here as Mark is battling up against the Black Spectre. And there's the Hunter's Moon character as well. The last days of Moon Knight are here. But he's not going down. There's the character of Zodiac without a fight. But after the moon sets on Mark Spector, the Midnight Mission will carry on. And yeah, we have just a great panel teasing all these supporting characters that have showed up across Jed MacKay's run, whether it be Tigra, Hunter's Moon, or some of these other characters. Really appreciated how this new Moon Knight run has levied some existing continuity over with Mark, as well as forming a new identity, a new set of supporting characters for the series. And I think the location of the Midnight Mission has also given this book a very strong, a very decisive premise as well that Jed MacKay has been able to foster across so many different issues. A new knight will have his vengeance. There we go. And that kind of showcases some of our David Finch covers on the tail. The knight is dead. Long live the knight. The last days of Moon Knight are coming in from Jed MacKay and Capuccio. Set to go on sale December. All right, let's see what else Marvel has to preview for us today here. Moon Knight may be dying, but vengeance of the Moon Knight rises, clawing itself from the grave, MacKay said. We're thrilled to bring the next chapter of the saga to uneasy life as the Midnight Mission reels from a recent loss. And yet, Moon Knight still takes the nighttime streets. Despite the apocalyptic events of Moon Knight 28 to 30, we have plenty left to tell in the story of Moon Knight, and I'm excited for readers to join us. Explaining the new design, Capuccio said, "We needed a new black suit in this series, so here we are. For the design, I took inspiration from ancient Egyptian banded armor while trying to stay true to the mood of the character. I replaced the classic batons with similar weapons that are reminiscent of the flowers of the Nile as depicted in hieroglyphics. He is a new Moon Knight, both in appearance and spirit, and needed a change of look to suit the situation, as you will see." I really find it striking to read how much character detail and all of these really interesting Egyptian iconography was lent over to the suit. Very happy that Capuccio has such attention to detail in terms of the design, and also that he was the person to put the design together over in the first place. You know, sometimes Marvel uses people who are not even somewhat associated with the book to come up with the character designs. So the fact that we have the just excellent interior artist that has stuck with this series for such a long time to redefine the look of Moon Knight is very, very thrilling here. This is the new Moon Knight outfit that Capuccio is teasing as well over on the cover. Of course, this one illustrated by David Finch, who's been working on the Moon Knight property for just an incredibly long time now, extending back years and years over to Marvel. And it looks like we have some more preview pages. Let's go ahead and put some of these up on the screen in terms of Moon Knight issue 28 here. I think some of Alessandro Capuccio's really curvy and expressionistic line captures so much emotion out of the Moon Knight property here. The way that we're teasing the death of Moon Knight with Mark Spector really draped in all these red hues is so beautiful with the character of Khonshu behind him. It really took me a long time to appreciate this really distorted line from Capuccio when I was first reading this Moon Knight series, but as time has gone on, I've started to realize the true genius behind some of the work here. Also, I want to hand it to Marvel for always picking such interesting artists over for the Moon Knight property in their last couple of runs. And we also have the preview of the cover for Vengeance of the Moon Knight coming in from David Finch, too. Let's see what this is an interior page for. So this is an interior page from Vengeance of the Moon Knight from Alessandro Capuccio. This one teases a lot of the characters who have been so formative to this Moon Knight run, but also introduces some other characters too. We have Tigra, Hunter's Moon. We also have some of the magic users in the background of titles like Gods with people like Clea and Doctor Strange. I think it's really interesting with how many comic books that Clea has been popping up in, whether it be between Gods, this series, or her main book. Some of these books are also written by Jed McKay too, so it can't be that much of a coincidence. Also, I do think it's interesting that Hawkeye and Mockingbird are featured over on this page too. I wonder if they're going to play a larger role in this book moving forward. Really amazing page. That sense of perspective that Capuccio lent over towards this Vengeance of the Moon Knight one issue, I think, is really going to make for a fascinating introduction to this series. Let's see if this is an interior page too. It is teasing the character of Hunter's Moon. In fact, I even wonder if this page is kind of teasing the fact that he might not be the character of the brand new Moon Knight, especially due to the fact that he's wearing his old costume over on this page and does not appear to be in this really ultra-modern Moon Knight garb. Once again, though, I think this page just does a fantastic job catching all the really interesting ways that Capuccio is able to put a page together. The way that this kind of planet over behind Hunter's Moon is shining on him adds this really fascinating, distorted visual element that makes this page just so interesting to look at here. I also love the fact that you can't see Hunter's Moon expression, but it really seems like with some of the lines over on his mask that he's carrying this aggressive sort of demeanor here. Very cool to pick up on all the disparate details coming in from the subtext of Capuccio's just beautiful, beautiful comic book art. We have another beautiful page. I think this one was also teased in terms of the trailer here, featuring Hunter's Moon yet again, over with some Egyptian iconography and some really harrowing looking monsters. Really great, really fantastic page designs with these panels kind of bleeding in over to the foreground and Hunter's Moon being featured as the background. Very, very fun stuff over in terms of Marvel with Vengeance of the Moon Knight. I definitely wasn't expecting for Marvel to go ahead and, kill off Mark Spector, if that is indeed what they are going to do, if that is indeed the direction they're going to take over with the property. But the idea of mixing up a series when it's this far into its publication, I think, not a bad idea, not a bad idea. And also, I think Jed McKay and Capuccio have just done so much excellent work with this property. I can't help but be excited about what's coming next. Hope you enjoyed our Moon Knight coverage. I'm going to go ahead and take a quick break. I'll be back in less than 60 seconds here. Thanks so much for sticking around. Thank you so much for sticking aboard here. Let's go ahead and see what else we have. Okay, this next one is also going to be really, really interesting here. In fact, we even have this cover already up on the screen. But it looks like Marvel has just announced a brand new series over for Black Widow and Hawkeye. The one thing that makes this comic book really, really interesting is the fact that Natasha is currently using a symbiote over in the main Venom series. And as this cover, I think, very strongly suggests, it looks like Natasha is going to suit up in the symbiote once again to operate alongside Clint Barton in this upcoming Black Widow and Hawkeye series. This one coming in one day earlier, November 2nd, over from Marvel. Let's check out a little bit more about it. Venomous and deadlier than ever, Black Widow teams up with Hawkeye in new series. Launching the pair's 60th anniversary, Stephanie Phillips and Paolo Vianelli launch Black Widow and Hawkeye this March. Announced earlier today by Marvel Comics editor-in-chief C.B. Cebulski at the Lucca Comics and Games Festival in Italy, two of Marvel's most iconic heroes will share the spotlight in next year's Black Widow and Hawkeye. Celebrating 60 action-packed years of Black Widow and Hawkeye, this new chapter in the pair's storied legacy will be told by rising Marvel stars, writer Stephanie Phillips, known for her acclaimed work on Contest of Chaos and Cosmic Ghost Rider, and Paolo Vianelli, currently delivering cosmic brilliance in Captain Marvel Dark Tempest. The four-issue limited series will both dive into the duo's history of secrets and espionage while playing off recent developments, including Natasha Romanoff's recent bondings with a symbiote. I want to talk a little bit about some of my exposure with the writer of this series, Stephanie Phillips. Honestly, the only series I've really checked out and enjoyed by Stephanie Phillips has been that Cosmic Ghost Rider book. I do think that maybe some of those elements of humor and intrigue could definitely fuel the Black Widow and Hawkeye book, and I'm really excited for Phillips to be the one to write Natasha Romanoff over in the symbiote as well. I think these female creators might have more of a perspective as opposed to, their male counterparts and fleshing out some of these comic book characters. Also think this cover from Steven Segovia for the issue looks just really, really tremendous too. The eyes of a hawk and the venom of a widow. Even when Black Widow and Hawkeye had no one to trust, they still had each other. Even though their paths somewhat diverged, so when Clint Barton is accused of a rogue assassination attempt that puts the US and Madripoor at odds, a symbiote-equipped Natasha Romanoff thinks nothing of coming to his aid. But as echoes of their past ripple into the present, it will take all the faith in each other and the lessons learned along the way to protect the future. I like the idea of Clint Barton being accused of a rogue assassination attempt. It at least gives this Black Widow and Hawkeye a premise that's really fueled by some spy scenarios as soon as the issue opens here. I love getting the chance to dig deep with Natasha Romanoff and Clint Barton to tell a fast-paced spy story that celebrates their 60th anniversary. Nothing is as it seems, and I'm having a ton of fun writing these characters. Not to mention, they both look great for 60s. Yes, so this is a 60th anniversary, series over from Marvel too. Really like the logo design in terms of this like corner box here with Clint and Natasha and this kind of Black Widow symbiote in that A over on the ears. I think that's pretty cool too. Okay, so this was like the first announcement of this series. So I guess this is all the information we have. This series is set to debut over on March 13th over from Marvel. Yeah, really am interested to see how some other creators are able to use the identity of Black Widow and Hawkeye. I feel like this comic book has so much potential, and I'd be interested to see if Stephanie Phillips is going to work with Black Widow alongside maybe Toron Grondbeck in the main Venom comic book too. All right, let's go ahead and cover a really, really fascinating comic book preview. And then we will dive into our next biggest story of the entire stream. Okay, so I have been absolutely mesmerized by this recent storyline over in Marvel's main Amazing Spider Man series that's set to bring all these disparate elements of Limbo back into some of the narrative. Limbo was featured earlier in this book during the Dark Web storyline, where the clones of Spider Man and Jean Grey, Ben Riley, and Madeline Pryor staged an assault over on New York City using the dimension over with Limbo. While Spider Man was able to put a stop over to some of these actions, the character of Madeline Pryor was able to reform some of her prior activities and is now operating out of the Limbo Embassy. The way that Spider-Man has now come back into contact over with the character of Rek-Rap, the sort of limbo-esque version of himself, has been a lot of fun and has fueled the most recent chapter of Amazing Spider-Man issue 36. Let's go ahead and check in with the latest chapter of the series and see if Spider-Man and Rek-Rap are able to battle the nefarious Repo character that Madeline Pryor recently summoned in order to bring back some of her Limbo characters. Exclusive. Spider-Man tries to keep his demonic Bizarro from being sent back to Limbo. Let's see here. The Spider Man titles are gearing up for the Gang War crossover, but before we get to that big event, and after Spider Man's brief but tragic time being infected by the sins of Norman Osborn, Amazing Spider Man is taking a break from the heavier drama for a hilarious interlude starring Spider Man's demonic Bizarro Rek-Rap, as we see in the CBR exclusive preview of next week's Amazing Spider Man 37. Spider Man 37 coming in over from Zeb Wells, Ed McGuinness, Emilio Lyso, Mark Farmer, Wade Von Grodbadger, with inks over from McGuinness as well. We have colors from Marcio Menes, Eric Arcienega, letters from Joe Caramagna, and we're really set to continue the Rek-Rap story from last issue, where Spider-Man and Mayor Luke Cage went to see Madeline Pryor at the Limbo Embassy that New York has for Limbo, to see if she can do something about the damage that various demons have been doing to New York City. She agreed to help, but they didn't know that her version of help was releasing a new demon, the Repossessor, also known as Repo, to take these rogue demons back to Limbo by any means necessary. Now Repo is coming for Rek-Rap, and Spider-Man has to find a way to stop it. I've already had the chance to preview some of the artwork coming in for Amazing Spider-Man 37. There's just tremendous pieces over from Emilio Lyso and Ed McGuinness. Let's go ahead and look in on some of the interior preview pages over for the issue. I think this really kind of funhouse interpretation of Rek-Rap is just a great way to go ahead and kick off the book here. Also love this more animated artwork that the Amazing Spider-Man series has. It feels like Zeb Wells is so great at writing into a really fascinating and like silly narrative here. And I love these story elements of Limbo and how they've been feeling this book to go in a more humor-based direction. We can see Rek-Rap is trying to recall his own storytime adventures here, battling against this mysterious Kraken over on the page. In this next sequence here, we get to see Rek-Rap dispatching his foe very, very fast over in his interpretation of the events. We also have some beautiful panel bleeds coming in from the Kraken. Really interesting kind of canted panels over at the top of the page. And Rek-Rap almost kind of bursting out of the webs over on this final image with that panel bleed. I think that is absolutely tremendous. Plus, some of the shading over on the Kraken in this final panel as Rek-Rap is kind of kicking him aside is also just really, really beautiful here. One of the most striking elements about this particular page was really seeing Rek-Rap react to the Kraken fighting off against Repo, who Madeline Pryor recently summoned over in the series. Really getting to see some of Rek-Rap's interpretation of the scenario was fascinating. He says, "Before I could web hang down to my enemies, I saw something very strange, something very worth repeating. So here I go, I'll repeat it now. A small man approached. His face was expressionless as he muttered something about his queen and bringing Kraken home. Then he turned into a monster, a giant mouth really, and gobbled Kraken up. Who was he, and what did he want?" And the reveal over on Ed McGuinness's art with this next page over with Peter Parker reacting to Rek-Rap, I think is so silly and irreverent. I especially love this last piece of dialogue that Rek-Rap brings over to Peter Parker. He says, I guess I can give a little sneak peek just for you, Parker Pete Man. Peter is really trying to stop Rek-Rap from going back over to Limbo. All right, so that was our brief look over at Amazing Spider-Man 37 as the series really takes this really silly and irreverent interlude over with Spider-Man and Rek-Rap battling the Repo, the repossession character, as the gang war begins to continue over in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man. All right, without further ado, I want to go ahead and jump over to what is by far the biggest story of the entire stream. This one I think you've been waiting for, the entire time we've been live here, but we finally have some new information in terms of the X-Men. And it looks like none other than Kieran Gillen and Luca Maresca are set to explore some of the final elements over in Krakoa with this really ominous X-Men Forever series. Let's go ahead and read more about it over from Marvel. Since it began in 2019, the Krakoa era has been full of hope, transformation, and mystery. As the final stories of this bold age arrive in Fall of the House of X and Rise of the Powers of Ten, one of Krakoa's chief storytellers, Kieran Gillen, will team up with the superstar artist Luca Maresca to deliver long-awaited answers behind Krakoa's darkest truths and set the stage for Mutantkind's spectacular rebirth in X-Men Forever. Announced earlier today by Marvel Comics editor-in-chief C.B. Cebulski at the Lucca Comics and Games Festival in Italy, X-Men Forever will be a 4-issue limited series launching in March where Kieran Gillen will build upon the dramatic developments currently unfolding in the pages of Immortal X-Men, including the quest for Dominion, the interpersonal conflicts of the Quiet Council, and escape from the White Hot Room, and of course the divine intervention of the Phoenix. This series will provide pivotal insight into the shocking events of Fall of the House of X and Rise of the Powers of Ten, as well as an omnipotent new threat to Mutantkind introduced in the final secrets of Krakoa, Burn to Ashes. All right, let's go ahead and take a moment and talk about all the really interesting information and plot threads teased over in this particular paragraph. First of all, getting the chance to see Kieran Gillen really spearhead the end of the Krakoa era over for X-Men Forever. Very fascinating. Kieran Gillen has such a long history over at Marvel. This isn't even his first run over with the X-Men property. Plus, there's some really interesting plot threads teased here. Let's see, we have the quest for Dominion. This was one of the most fascinating storylines over in Sins of Sinister as we watch some of these clones over of Nathaniel Essex really try and reach that Dominion status. And it looked like one character did, but we still don't know who it is. Having these storylines that come back into the fold months and months later have continued to keep me so interested in these X-Men comics. I feel like the one X-Men title that has just done a phenomenal job carrying, some of that tense narrative in each and every issue has been none other than Jerry Duggan's X-Men. In fact, I think the most recent issue of Jerry Duggan's X-Men opens with an incredibly WTF scene, but ends also with an incredible WTF scene. And plus, the actual meat of the issue is what Firestar is going through in terms of her subterfuge in Orcus. Read X-Men 28. It's a great, great issue. In addition to this, we also have the interpersonal conflicts of the Quiet Council. I thought I read somewhere, maybe this isn't true, that Marvel is looking to bring together a new Quiet Council and some of the after effects in these, Fall of X series. So I'll continue to go ahead and keep an eye on that. But I kind of see what they're hinting at here. They're really saying that what Kieran Gillen has been building with people like, Destiny and Hope, we're probably going to get those final elements over in X-Men Forever. Grayson Red, Jerry Duggan has definitely been doing his thing. Indeed, indeed. That's exactly what I would say to describe it as well. Okay, another really fantastic plot element happening right now in Immortal X-Men that we on this very stream have dug into in a lot of detail has been the escape from the White Hot Room. Right now, there's a team of X-Men characters wandering through the desert with people like Destiny. And let's see, who else do we have? We also have Exodus. We also have Hope. They're over with Mother Righteous. They're kind of wandering through the desert, and they think they've found just a great place, just infested with some rabid wolverines. But it turns out they're actually in the White Hot Room. So it looks like in X-Men Forever, we're going to finally get to see some of our immortal X-Men characters escape the White Hot Room. And of course, the divine intervention of the Phoenix. Yeah, I think there's been some elements of that lingering towards the background, but I don't think there's really strong, aspects coming to mind. Maybe the core Jean Grey series is trying to build up more of a storyline between Jean Grey and the Phoenix. Okay, let's move over to our next paragraph. I actually think we did a great job teasing some of these aspects that Kieran Gillen is going to head back to in terms of X-Men Forever. Haunted House of X. How can you kill a digital god? What do you do when the Phoenix is bleeding out into nothing? There's been questions that have haunted you since the end of Immortal X-Men. Finally, some answers. There's also been questions that have haunted you since the start of Immortal X-Men. Finally, some answers, but not the ones you're expecting. Okay, what do we have here? Haunted House of X. I don't know if that means maybe the pit over on Krakoa comes alive. Right now, I'm speculating about what that could potentially be. How can you kill a digital god? Is this in reference to maybe like some AI over with Nimrod? I have no idea. What do you do when the Phoenix is bleeding out into nothing? Once again, really curious to see if any of these elements are coming in from the main Jean Grey book. Really kind of tepid and mysterious sentences teased over in this announcement. X-Men Forever is Luca and myself doing a coda to Immortal X-Men, a requiem for the Krakoan age, and is generally setting fire to all time and space. Fantastic. That is exactly what we're in the mood for here. It's the manipulative hand in the steel glove that is Rise of the Powers of 10. By the time it drops, you'll all be wondering what on earth is going on. Let's see, with certain characters, and X-Men Forever will give you all the answers. Yeah, really phenomenal cover coming in for Mark Brooks, teasing just the absolute destruction of the Krakoa era over on this X-Men Forever cover. Man, and I also continue to be a little bit sad, a little bit depressed about the final issues of the Krakoa saga. Going back in terms of the past couple years at Marvel, I think the X-Men franchise has been, I just think, the best, the absolute most fantastic place to read some of the highest quality that Marvel has to offer. The way that these books sync up with each other, too, has evoked just such a high level of quality here. I think I said it on a previous live stream, but the Krakoa era has been just such a blessing for Marvel's entire editorial. I hope going forward that some of these creators are going to stick on board for the next era of X-Men. I'd particularly like to see Kieran Gillen continue to work over with Hope and the character of Destiny too. Check out Mark Brooks' Haunting X-Men Forever #1 cover now, and stay tuned for more news about the final chapters of the X-Men's Krakoa Age in the weeks ahead. So this is a 4-issue miniseries on sale March 20th. Also, this book really seems to be setting up the end of Immortal X-Men. I think that's also very sad, right? I think Immortal X-Men has really been the sign of a shift towards like the Kieran Gillen, Al Ewing, Cy Spurrier era over in the X-Men comics. I think that era has almost been stronger than the beginning of Krakoa, maybe aside from House of X and Powers of 10. I feel like the way that all these writers have been able to collaborate with each other has built so many just wonderful, so many insane story scenarios for the X-Men comics, and I have no idea if Marvel is going to be able to follow up the incredible formula that they've created here, but I definitely want to try. I definitely think there's still some really interesting story scenarios for the X-Men characters. We're just going to have to go ahead and see where Marvel takes this property next. All right, really hope you enjoyed our dense coverage over on X-Men Forever. I'm very much anticipating that upcoming series. I feel like it has so much potential to be one of the very best comic books that Marvel is set to publish very, very soon. By the way, that X-Men series is coming out in March. Follow the House of X #1 is shipping over on January 3rd. Rise of the Powers of 10 is shipping on January 10th. So it looks like X-Men Forever is set to be one of the last pieces over in that really big continuity. All right, let's go ahead and switch over to another story that I think continues to get more interesting day by day by day. The Thunderbolts, the upcoming Thunderbolts series coming in over from Colin Kelly and Jackson Lansing, looks to be incredibly interesting. And the more time passes, the more interesting story elements we see in this series. Colin Kelly and Jackson Lansing talked their new Thunderbolt series, where the Winter Soldier team led hunt several seemingly unstoppable villains. This news article is coming in from CBR.com, written from Dave Richards. In the pages of Captain America Sentinel of Liberty, the Winter Soldier pulled off an ostensibly impossible task. He teamed with his friends to destroy a conspiracy that had manipulated him for decades and many of the events of the 20th and 21st centuries. Now that he knows what can be done, he'll team with some familiar faces to target more seemingly unstoppable foes. His crusade kicks off this December in the pages of a brand new 4-issue Thunderbolt series by the writers of Sentinel of Liberty, Colin Kelly and Jackson Lansing, and art from Geraldo Borges. The book teams Bucky Barnes with 7 of the Marvel Universe's most capable and dangerous spy-fi characters in the hopes of toppling villains like the Red Skull and Kingpin. CBR spoke with Lansing and Kelly about the book, Bucky's teammates, the relentlessly paced, action-packed missions they'll embark on, and the villains in their crosshairs. I've said this ad nauseum at this point, but Colin Kelly and Jackson Lansing, I think, had a pretty solid Captain America run with Captain America Sentinel of Liberty. The one aspect about that series that I think needed a little bit more kind of editorial control, a little bit more thought, was the surprise characterization over for Bucky Barnes, where he turned against people like Captain America and became the new revolution to try and take down the mysterious outer circle from the inside. And I don't think a lot of these plot elements landed. They really pulled on some of the melodramatic aspects and felt like they took the characterization of Bucky backwards. I'm really curious to see if Kelly and Lansing are able to tell a story with Bucky that captures these really dark elements of his character while keeping a lighter tone in order to stray away from some of the melodrama. One thing I can tell you is that the tone in terms of some of the preview pages from Geraldo Borges actually look really phenomenal across the new Thunderbolt series. Also, the team keeps getting more interesting like story scenarios as well. Black Widow recently got a symbiote, and while it's also affecting books like Venom, it's also set to create some new elements over for the Thunderbolt series. I think the way that Borges is able to lay out this page is also just amazingly beautiful here as we get to see Bucky pulling a gun on Contessa Fontaine. Plus, on this next page, the way that the threat of the Red Skull is teased with Bucky in action over with some of his Thunderbolts members, I think is also incredibly arresting. Also, once again, this sense of perspective. I think the way that Borges is able to lay out this double page spread looks absolutely phenomenal here. It's really cool seeing Sharon over as the Destroyer, which was a direct status quo follow up in the Captain America Sentinel of Liberty Series 2. On this final page, we get an even bigger tease of Red Skull fighting against the Guardian. Once again, the way that Borges is able to design the page here is really stunning. I love how this panel kind of bleeds out and introduces a little bit more texture, plus the negative space introduced here. Really beautiful, really tremendous. And I think the sense of action that Bucky lends over with this really strong subversive kick here captures a lot of intrigue, Man, I also have to hand it to Borges for using Fontaine in the background with this interesting, piece of computer equipment too. There's a lot of detail over in these panels. Okay, sadly, it looks like that is all the interior art we have for Thunderbolts. Let's go ahead and read what Lansing and Kelly have in store for this title. I think the more time goes by, the more interested I am in this series, actually. It feels like you have multiple intentions with this new Thunderbolts comic to welcome new readers, especially those curious about the in development Thunderbolts film. Continue some of the threads introduced in your Captain America run, continue the story legacy of Marvel's most interesting superhero teams, and to provide that sort of high stakes, super powered espionage and action featured in books like Secret Warriors. Is that an accurate description of your intentions? You know what? This is a really fantastic question from CBR. They're totally right. They're taking a team of Marvel Cinematic Universe inspired characters, really following up on the plot threads of the last Captain America series, and touching on some of the most recent continuity in terms of Marvel's publishing line. Let's see what Lansing and Kelly have to say about it. Lansing is up first. Yeah, I'd probably shuffle those around. First and foremost, our intentions are to follow Bucky Barnes out of what we've been doing with him in Sentinel of Liberty into a new chapter of his life. So this isn't just for readers of Sentinel, this is for readers of anything. But a larger part of our focus on the four-issue run is a look at what Bucky is doing as he's embracing the idea of being a leader and somebody who makes his own destiny. Colin Kelly says, I think the other element we want to highlight is you are correct, and it is an action espionage book. We are coming into this with our foot on the gas. We're getting a lot of great character work in. At the same time, we're delivering some A-plus kinetic espionage action. We don't often turn the action up to 11, and that's absolutely what we're doing here. I think it's interesting to see the intentions that a creative team comes into a book like this. Obviously, I think it's so smart when writers over at Marvel create what I call a meta narrative, which is where they take some plot elements from the last series and really meld it into their main series to feel like there's some cohesive elements, even though they're switching over between comic book to comic book. I'm glad that they're doing that over in this main series. I'm glad that they're also trying to appeal to new readers. There's probably a lot of comic book readers that are going to try and jump aboard Thunderbolts over with this new incarnation of the comic book title. Yeah, this book has a lot less room for characters to sit around and talk, which is normally where we find ourselves pretty comfortable. Every single issue is Bucky and at least two other characters from the Marvel Universe teaming up to take down a villain that's too large for them to take down. From Red Skull and Kingpin to Doom and American Kaiju. We're playing with these really large scale villains and pushing the action super hard as a result. Then, to speak of the movie of it all, people may have seen this and thought it was a movie synergy book. Yeah, that was what I saw in terms of the criticism too. And it was just weird seeing that because of the fact that Bucky was in the last run of the series. It definitely feels like there's already more story elements than having just an MCU comic book Thunderbolt storyline too. Bucky was going to be in that movie. He was done in Sentinel, and we wanted to continue working on Bucky. So we took that as an opportunity to make a Thunderbolts book around him. Ensure some of our characters are in the movie because why not? But we only tried to choose those characters we thought had some kind of emotional resonance with what Bucky was going through and had a place to go. So I don't think you're going to see any reflection of the plot of the Thunderbolts movie here, or even necessarily its tone. I think what you're going to see is us taking Marvel's interest in doing a Thunderbolts book and trying to use that to create a new comic to do so, to do something exciting and push this legacy forward. Let's see what else we have to check out about this Captain America, this new Thunderbolts series. Your cast also features the Black and White Widows. Natasha has been having adventures over in Venom, and writer Sarah Gailey's White Widow series kicks off November 1st. What's it like playing with these characters given recent developments in these books? Kelly says, as soon as we realized we could have two widows, our little writer brain started freaking out, and putting them together with Bucky Barnes is wonderful. There's all this strange chemistry between them. There's all this shared backstory, and it doesn't hurt that in the second issue, you're going to bring them all together at a very sexy party. These are petty people who you absolutely want to see in their sexiest cocktail outfits. So getting them walking in together was a real delight. Okay, we have some of the most interesting material I've seen yet over in this Thunderbolts interview. Jackson Lansing confirms that issue 2 is a triple date issue that takes Bucky, Black Widow, and White Widow into the Hellfire Club. It's going to be a really interesting dynamic. Love the fact that this Thunderbolt series is actually going to explore some of those elements in the Hellfire Club and link up with a really interesting X-Men plot point that is also spilled into some other comic books outside of the line, like Invincible Iron Man. I also want to give a shout out to the White Widow series. It's dynamite. We were starting up on Thunderbolts as that series launched, and we were able to read the scripts of the first couple of issues. They fundamentally changed the way we were writing the character. I think Sarah has a real insight into what makes White Widow a distinct, interesting character and how to push that to 11. Then, obviously, thank you to everyone involved in getting Natasha a Venom symbiote. This is funny. I like how Lansing is talking about how all of the Marvel continuity aspects really push the Thunderbolt series towards a different direction. They told us, hey, she can have a symbiote. We went back through issue 2 and realized that all the individual action was cooler and all the beats were more interesting. All of her individual scenes got a little bit fresher if Natasha was dealing with the dark influence of the symbiote and how all that interacts with the dark influence that Bucky is embracing as he moves into this role as somebody in the shadows who's willing to make those hard choices. Yeah, really phenomenal stuff teased for this upcoming Thunderbolt series. Love how it's not only taking on elements of the Hellfire Club, but also melding some of the action with Natasha's symbiote. Let's go ahead and get the last word over on the book from Jackson Lansing. We are now almost 100 years from World War II, and we're still fighting the Red Skull. I think there's an interesting bit of sociology here, and Bucky has noticed it as a result of the Century game, and he's going to put an end to it. So what does that mean? And how do you do that when every time you kill the Red Skull, even more Red Skulls pop up? He's Hydra incarnate in that respect. That's going to be the focus of the book, and having all these spy-fi Marvel heroes punch the crap out of some Nazis has been very cathartic to write. Really love how Jackson Lansing, Colin Kelly, as well as Geraldo Borges are really trying to frame some additional context around the series as opposed to it just being a spy-oriented comic book over in the Marvel Universe. Once again, the more days go by, the more excited I am for this Thunderbolt series. And I hope that the publisher continues to introduce even more interesting elements of continuity that the writers can weave into the narrative as the Thunderbolt series ends. Also, with this being a miniseries, I'm very curious to see what Marvel has in store for some of the follow-up. It feels like this narrative is really ambitious, and there's probably more to it than just a miniseries here. Okay, so this is also the 4-issue series over for Thunderbolts. Let's go ahead and preview one of our next upcoming stories. Hope you enjoyed our really deep dive into that highly anticipated upcoming Marvel series. All right, we have another really fantastic edition over with X-Men Monday that we're going to preview. This is A really fantastic piece coming in over from Adventures in Poor Taste, published each Monday. This one is really set to explore some of the next plot implications over for upcoming X-Men comics. Plus, we're also going to go ahead and get to preview some upcoming brand new X-Men issues. Let's check this one out right now, coming in from Chris Hassan over on Adventures in Poor Taste. Welcome, X Men fans, to another mutant milestone, the uncanny 225th edition of X Men Monday at Adventures in Poor Taste. 225 installments, that's what, 8 anniversary editions spread throughout the Krakoan era. Let's break it down. X Men Monday 25. In fact, let's go ahead, skip this, head directly into some of the news articles here. Welcome to X-Men Monday 225. Let's kick off this mutant milestone by turning things over to X-Fan Bambi, who wanted to thank you for all the love and effort you've put into these stories so far. To celebrate the 225th edition of X-Men Monday, Bambi wanted to take it back to Uncanny X-Men 225, which happened to be the start of the original Fall of the Mutant storyline. What are your thoughts on this iconic event, and how did it inspire or reshape or help shape the fall of X? Yeah, Steve Fox has really become an instrumental writer in terms of Marvel's publishing line. Really appreciate all these issues of Dark X-Men so far, and I feel like some of Steve Fox's upcoming Dead X-Men comic books are set to also take the narrative in a really fascinating upcoming direction. Let's see what Fox says about the shaping of the Fall of X story. Speaking for Dark X-Men, it is one of the reasons Warren Worthington has a rough time in the book, and why he has a golden skull mask. Just like his original death mask, I don't think Fall of the Mutants was top of mind when most of us were conceiving this era, but it did inspire that knot at least. Sorry, Warren fans. Oh, fantastic. We also have Al Ewing contributing over to, some of this interview over on Adventures in Poor Taste. Let's preview Al Ewing's commentary on shaping the fall of X. I remember the big X Factor side of things very well. Apocalypse really coming to his own as the big A we've known and love. So I guess we're paying homage of a sort. However, many years later, by having Apocalypse play such a big part in the events of the fall, and helping pave way for whatever comes next. Really also think the status quo with Warren in recent issues of Dark Angel has been so intensely foreboding, and have created just beautiful story elements for that book. As we head towards the conclusion of the Krakoan era, does this final chapter have an official name? Are we still in the fall of the House of X? Or are we entering what can be referred to, are we still in the fall of X, or what can be referred to as the fall of the House of X era? I would say that Fall of the House of X and Rise of the Powers of 10 are the end of Fall of X, in the same way that Ten of Swords was the end of Dawn of X and Inferno was the end of Reign of X. Meaning, like at the start of them, we're all still in the Fall of X era. It's going to get through them and getting to the end that gets us out. All right, let's really break this down. This was a question I also had in terms of Marvel's current publishing line. So Jordan D. White is really saying that Fall of the House of X and Rise of the Powers of 10 are going to go ahead and close out our Fall of X era. And that was one of the things I also had some questions about, because a lot of these Fall of X books are miniseries that are set to wind down really, really soon. Also, Marvel recently announced seemingly the end of Immortal X-Men in that X-Men Forever piece that we read recently too. So I think the more we read about this upcoming era of the publisher, the more it feels like this is the end, this is the next stage after Fall of X in the Krakoan era. Conversely, I would say this is the last drinks before the bar shuts down on the tables, set fire to the curtains era. Al Ewing, I think we're in the fall of. New X eras will have new names, and I look forward to seeing what they are. X-Fan Cathal says it can sometimes feel like superhero comic status quos are forced to wrap up quickly. But Cathal's enjoyed how intentional the road to the end of the Krakoan era has felt. The current story feels like it's been building and building since at least the second Hellfire Gala, with the dominoes starting to fall now. How far back was the fall of X and climax of the Krakoan era settled upon as the end goal? I feel like there is so much truth into what this person is saying. I feel like if you go back and look at Inferno, it was clear that towards this era of X-Men, something was going to give, something big was going to wind down really soon in terms of the Krakoan era. And I think this follow up here really feels like a climactic final stage in terms of the fall of the House of X and Rise of the Powers of 10 era. Kieran Gillen, I'm doing my squinty face here. A baby joined me in this period. My memories are fragmentary. Apparently, I wrote most of a Marvel event at some point in the last few years, Judgment Day, but I don't believe it. As that sounds deeply unlikely, I remember reading Jerry's outline for his X-Men run just as I arrived, and what had become Fall of X and Fall of the House of X was firmly embedded in it. As such, at least the general narrative shape of this has been in place for as long as I've been in the X office, I think. I'm an unreliable witness. I'm an unreliable everything. Hearing the fact that this Fall of the House of X and Fall of X was already in Jerry Duggan's X-Men line or X-Men outline is really, really intriguing here. I think that is just so fantastic to read as well, because I think these final stages of X-Men are really going to read like the finale to a big story as opposed to anything else. Leah Williams, it was always the plan. I remember my very first Creative Summit meeting sitting in a conference room with everyone as we listened to Jonathan Hickman overview his long range plan that would be years in the making. It was always constructed to this end. I was awed at the scale and scope of it, and that such massive storytelling could be planned that far in advance and carried out, not in terms of the specifics within the books, mind you, but the inevitable fall of X. Yes, and you know what? I want to take a few moments to talk about that. I think that is one of the most interesting elements of the Krakoan era. Something that I've been trying to hint at all stream is that there's like 5 or 6 books right now that link up together in incredibly subversive ways. There's even story elements of the main Spider-Man series that links back to X-Men with Madeline Pryor at the Limbo Embassy in terms of the Dark X-Men. This sense of like a shared universe is just one of the most subversive things about the X-Men line in general. And I'd love to see another project that had this many people, that had this many books connected to it too. I think right now we are in like a weird renaissance period for the X-Men, and I hope that really strong sense of narrative energy continues as we head into the next era after Krakoa. Steve Folks says, I certainly haven't been around as long as Leia was, but I can confirm this was all pretty much set, give or take a month. By the time Jordan approached me for Dark X-Men, let's see, in the fall of 2022, I think there's a tendency among readers to think publishing plans can be really reactionary, but in my experience, a lot of it is already determined. I love hearing that too. It sounds like Steve Folks really tried to add some more elements towards Fall of X instead of kind of shaping the direction of the storyline at large. It's been weird to see some people's interactions to the X-Men comics. As soon as Jonathan Hickman left, there were a lot of people who drew ire across these X-Men titles, but it's almost felt like these books have felt more cohesive after he's been gone, weirdly enough. I thought that some of the issues he went in over with his X-Men solo series, I just don't think his X-Men comic was as strong as Jerry Duggan's. I know I might get some hate for saying that, but I really believe that to be true. I think House of X and Powers of 10 is like a magnum opus. I think it's amazing. But in terms of his main X-Men run, I almost think Jerry Duggan has managed to, surpass some of the scripts he delivered. Alan Ewing says, there was definitely something on the table when I arrived. That was around the planning for the first Hellfire Gala, give or take, and as I recall, there were a few pieces in motion around then. It's hard to recall with precision what came into being when, but I will say there's one major moment coming in Fall of X that I've heard Jerry pitch in one form or another since my very first meeting at C2E2 back in the before times. You'll know it when you see it. Al Ewing came into the X-Men franchise, much sooner than Steve Folks did. So hearing that there wasn't as strong of an outline for Fall of X, I think makes a lot of sense, actually. Jordan D. White, yeah, for sure. There are parts of this narrative that have been baked into it since the very beginning. And then the collaborative nature of it all has meant it's kept evolving and added new things in every step. So there are elements that are very different from when it was first discussed, but there are some narrative parts that have made it through the whole time intact. Naturally, that Mark Brooks promotional image revealed at New York Comic Con is fans talking and, of course, speculating. As many have pointed out, not everything in this teaser images ends up making it into comics. So, how do these promotional images come about? Is the idea to include characters plus a few red herrings? Is Mark free to just go wild? Honestly, if Cyclops doesn't end up sitting like that in the actual comic, readers might riot. I've seen this too. I think there's some plot elements from these X-Men comics, from these promotional images that don't always spill into the narrative. I really actually want to see Marvel directly address that. Kieran Gillen says, don't underestimate Jean's sitting power either. Kieran Gillen always trying to come in here with the joke, always trying to be silly and irreverent. We have Steve Orlando coming to give some criticism. He says, usually I'd say they come about with me sending a list of X-listers who probably don't need to be on the poster, but who I'd kill for Mr. Brooks to draw. Steve Folks, the zombie X-Babies spread in last year's X-Men annual was my attempt to finally check X-Babies Havoc off the list from that first promo. Oh my goodness. We're still working with plot elements from the first promotional image that the writers are trying to squeeze into recent X-Men comics. But yes, we do suggest relevant characters, and then Mark puts a spin on them. It's fun to see readers guess what should be taken literally and what might be a red herring. We have a previous promotional image too, teasing some of these characters and storylines from Mark Brooks. Jordan D. White, there is reasoning that goes into these images. I'm glad to hear that, Jordan White. Sometimes the actual details are more literal than others. In that first image at the top of it all, we had some very specific things. Moira on the bench, Cerebro, new characters, but some of the things were just reflecting the long history of the X-Men, like the Lobster. I think David Gabriel requested him, if I recall correctly. Speaking of the comic book crustaceans, X-fan Ian Jackson asked, what are the chances we'll finally see Bill the Lobster before the end of the Krakoa era? Okay, I don't know who Bill the Lobster is. I'll bite. Who is Bill the Lobster? All right, what do we got here? The Lobster Bill was a scientific experiment that aimed to grant people superpowers through cybernetics. Ramon, I can't pronounce that last name, and his colleague Tadashi Fujita were brilliant college students with a research grant on facilities near Coney Island. The two scientist lab experiments in using cybernetics to enhance beings resulted in the creation of augmented abilities, human-level intelligence and strength, and the ability to project small illusions for a communication for a pair of lobsters, Bill and Don. All right, this one created in Fallen Angels 2 in February of 1987 by Joe Duffy and Kerry Gammill. Very funny information, a really one-off Marvel character who, curiously enough, I don't even know about here. All right, there we go. There's Bill the Lobster. Once again, you heard it here first. Staying on characters for a bit, X-fan Leia Beekeeper wants to know which creators work with a specific character that blew you away in the Krakoan era. Steve Orlando is one of the creators I still want to answer and spotlight a few things. For one, the revelations about Apocalypse under not just Jonathan hands, but those of the entire X office have been a game changer for me. Not that I didn't like him before, but he's become so much more dynamic and rich in the Krakoan era. I also think the character work Vita Ayala and Charlie Jane Anders did with New Mutants was a wonderful from top to bottom. The cast was always huge, but each personality was distinct and compelling. I don't think anyone's ever gotten me so into Sabretooth as Victor Laval. I can go on. I agree with a lot of what Steve Orlando is saying. I didn't get that into Vita Ayala and Charlie Jane Anders with the New Mutants, but I always thought that book was super ambitious with some of the characters and plot threads it was taken on. Sabretooth by Victor Laval has been a bright spot in the Krakoan era and has been a book that's always kept me guessing. Totally agree that Apocalypse in this second phase of X-Men has been really, really interesting to read, especially in terms of the X-Men Red ongoing series. I want to know what Kieran Gillen has enjoyed during the Krakoa era. There's been so much smart character work in The Office. I'm going to go for the dumbest character in the Krakoan age. Leia's Boom Boom was basically a glitter Ramones, but in the dumb smart aesthetic with a real undertonesy heart beneath the punk pop. Oh, that's kind of nice for Kieran Gillen to say. Leia Williams, Kieran, that was so unexpected. I'm making the simp emoji face IRL. I also have to spotlight Kieran Gillen's iconic character work with Immortal X-Men, the inception of which I had the privilege of witnessing firsthand when Kieran joined the X office, and I don't think I've ever missed an opportunity in the Slack to hype Kieran about it. Teenie Howard did incredible work with Betsy Braddock in Excalibur and Betsy Braddock, Captain Britain, and solidified so many important new heights for her. Lastly, I have to shout out Zeb Wells for making me feel big feelings about characters I'd never cared about before in Hellions. Zeb scripts are so funny that I have snippets from just the panel descriptions burned into my brains for this day. Steve, folks, really glad to hear some more support for Hellions. Hellions, one of my favorite books in the Krakoan era, very edgy, very dark X-Men series that fleshed out so many engaging story directions for the X-Men characters. Let's see, Steve folks, second Hellions, especially the revamp of Grey Crow into such a cool sleeper hit from this era. Nothing about that cast should have worked, and yet it's a blast. My turn to answer. As all of these individual writers have mentioned, Hellions, great book, really fantastic setup. I love how some of the elements from the Krakoan X-Men bled over into Spider-Man's Dark Web story. That was a really great moment for me. I'm also a big fan of Jonathan Hickman's Inferno. I think House of X and Powers of 10 was super epic way to kick off the line. I love some of that first exploration of Betsy Braddock in Excalibur and the Captain Britain Betsy Braddock series. There's so many bright spots across the Krakoa line, even with the Victor Laval X-Men comics that were mentioned earlier with Sabretooth and the Exiles. It just feels like I could go on all day long about these different books. For me, the most important element of X-Men is the trifecta of X-Men Red, Immortal X-Men, and X-Men. I think each of those series, month in, month out, are just so absolutely tremendous. Oh, we have even more answers. Al Ewing says, I'm a big fan of Teeny's work with Rachel Summers. Vita's character work in New Mutants was absolutely brilliant. But to take it right back to the earliest days, Jonathan's reimagining of Nimrod made quite an impression. I'm going to co-sign that, Al Ewing. I totally agree with that. All right, Jordan D. White. There are so many, but right now I will call out Al Ewing's work with both Storm and Magneto being wonderful. Yes, we've talked about X-Men Red extensively, but I do think the work that Al Ewing has done with Magneto has been just absolutely tremendous. They are both huge beloved characters that I'm always not drawn to, yet Al was able to make me completely love reading about both of them. And I'm not just saying that because he's going to be writing them both in Resurrection of Magneto. From the start of Sword, I was really blown away by how much Magneto resonated with me. And when Storm joined the title, the same was true. Honestly, every character who appeared in Sword or X-Men Red for even a moment was handled with astonishing skill, be they Earth Mutant or Arakko. Jordan White, I am so happy to hear you say that. Once again, X-Men Red does not get the love it deserves. Jerry Duggan, I think every time we let the artist drive, we were rewarded. Hellfire is probably the most obvious example, but there were a lot of other ones, big and small, along the way. Jerry Duggan's most recent Hellfire script was like a 10 out of 10, just insane issue of X-Men. Is there an X-Men character you never realized was so popular until you started working on X-Men comics? Steve Orlando says, I've been pleasantly surprised by the Mama Max Hive. What on earth is the Mama Max Hive? An anthropomorphic elephant. I don't know if it's legal to put this up on the screen, but here's the Mama Max Hive. This is Maximus Jensen. The elephant-like Mammomax were recruited into a new brotherhood of evil mutants led by Exodus, who first clashed with the X-Men in Philadelphia. Oh, this is a Chuck Austin creation. Very interesting. Very interesting. Featuring art from Salvador LaRocca. First appeared in X-Men 161 from 2004. We're learning a lot from this news article today. Kieran Gillen, I've been surprised before, so nothing was much of a surprise. And back then, everything was a surprise. I think the one that struck me this time was there are a lot more Polaris fans than I remember. I'm lucky in that all I write are unpopular characters, and even if they're not unpopular, I'll work on making them so. Steve, folks, not one character in particular, but the passion fans have for D-listers always makes me smile. We'll get tweets very earnestly asking why so-and-so isn't getting a starring role somewhere. The X line is bigger than it's ever been, and there's still barely room to fit all the A-listers. The cool thing about Krakoa putting all the toys back in the toy box, making them available for use again, but is that there are only so many pages published in a month. I was handed the election idea to implement when Jonathan Hickman left the building, and it was a good reminder that every character has its cheering section. I think the surprise would probably be Forearm. I knew WizKid would go over. I knew Peeper would go over. I knew pretty much any X character had a deeply intense fan base, but I wasn't prepared for the reaction to Valerio Schiti putting a beard on Forearm. Suddenly, out of nowhere, everyone wants his fifth arm. Incredible scenes. Jordan White, I will always remember fondly the time I took over X-Men books, declared that I was going to write songs about characters, and allowed people to chime in on Twitter with who I should write about. Maggot won by a lot, so I wrote a nice Maggot song, and then kindly asked the fans not to do that to me again, only to be forced to write a song about Adam X. X-Men fan Mungo wanted to know if there's anything good in Beast's future. Mungo said, please, just give us Beast fans some scrap that this will turn out okay, even if it's just, it will turn out okay. Mark Basso, Beast seems okay, but what do you mean? He's doing what Beast for mutant kind, and what could be wrong with that? Are you saying there's a time Beast wouldn't have taken this road to get there? That's interesting. Kieran Gillen says, something good in Beast's future. Maybe reprinting Steve Sanders in my sword run. Beast was there before all the mass murder and all that, and before Abigail's mass murder and all that. At least no one has turned Lockheed into a mass murderer yet, so I'd suspect the Grudge unit, of course, came pre-mass murderized. Sam T asked if the idea for Dead X-Men came after seeing fan reaction to this year's Hellfire Gala, or was it the plan all along? Yeah, I think the upcoming Dead X-Men series set to reintroduce some of the characters who died during the Hellfire Gala is one of the most ambitious upcoming X-Men titles over at Marvel, and I'm excited to see it's just some more plot implications and how this book starts to develop here. Jerry Duggan says, we've not made any creative decisions by fan reaction, and if we did, I don't think we'd still be working on X-Men comics 6 years after we commenced. The Hellfire Galas are bottled lightning. They're what happens when a couple dozen artists, editors, writers, and executives are all moving parts towards the same goal, and the result crushes. They nourish different parts of the business, and I stood and won this past summer. The best X-Men comics are where they're back against the wall, and that's why this year's gala will be an immortal comic. As for the team that never was, they got to be, of course,
and they were always going to get to be. Just to be a candidate for the team was an instant ticket to elevation. And on a final thought about fan reaction, the only reaction that has any meaning is purchasing the book. Comic readers are actually the secondary market. Vote with your dollars. Pre ordering a comic book will ensure its survival. Others will fill in on the details, but finding places for them in Rise of the Powers of 10 has been the best thing about this process. Folks, is cooking. I continue to see all these different X-Men writers really call out Steve Folks, as well as the continuity he's building for dead X-Men in really interesting ways. I'm so glad that people are this excited about what Steve Folks is kind of cooking up in this book. Kieran has been wildly generous with making sure Dead X-Men fits into the stories he's telling. As Jerry said, the book was planned prior to the gala and any fan reaction. I had already been asked to write it, but it was reaffirming to see that there was a real passion to see these five candidates in action together. Readers have had to wait a bit, but I can tell you the result is going to be a very big, a very classic X adventure with these five leading the way. Jordan White, we've talked about this before, but every year when we do the votes, just by nature of being spotlighted in that way, some of the characters end up getting more story showcases. One of which we've done a Secret X-Men story for the last 2 years. I've really loved Marvel's Secret X-Men comics where the people who didn't get voted to the X-Men teams had their own comic books and stories to tell. But this year, instead of getting a Secret X-Men, we're getting the Dead X-Men. We knew that we would somehow find a way to do something with them, but when plans came together and gelled into Dead X-Men, we were thrilled. I think it's the biggest showcase the losers of the fan votes have gotten so far, which I guess is appropriate considering what they had to go through. Indeed, indeed. But yeah, as said before, we were making those plans before the gala issue came out. There's a lot of concern about the various X babies. X fan Umpus said with Jubilee dead, who's taking care of Shogo? And what about all the babies under Stacy X's care? Then X-Pet fan said with his moms fighting off separate battles, who is watching Amazing Baby? Jordan D. White says that Shogo is still in Otherworld being raised as a dragon by the Fae. Not what I would want for their child, but to each their own. The babies were under Stacy's care. You know, I would assume they're still under Stacy's care in the desert Atlantic Krakoa oasis in the white hot room. Amazing Baby, my guess is that with no one to look after them, Amazing Baby ran off to London, ate a child, and is wearing their skin under a little British human, but that is just a guess. I'm really hoping Jordan White is kidding here, but with me lacking context for the Amazing Baby, I have no idea if he's joking or not. Karen Gillan, I'd agree. Anyone who isn't explicitly shown on Earth is almost certainly in Krakoa in the white hot room. It's really a living community. All right, let's go ahead and start to wind down our stream. I want to preview some of the upcoming X-Men teaser images that they always have over in these Adventures in Poor Taste articles. Man, really important page over in X-Men. I'm not sure if this one is from Inferno or not, but to me, it really feels like one of the aspects that marks the first and second half of the Krakoan era is whether, Magneto and Xavier were working together, because that relationship really fractured, towards the second half of the Krakoa comics. Yeah, I remember this beautiful page from the most recent Hellfire Gala too. Okay, so it looks like we have an upcoming teaser image over for Children of the Vault. I've been loving this series. I've actually been continuing to read it after the first issue. I think the more animated approach and all the elements of continuity has made this really just a strong book over at Marvel. Yeah, we already took a look at Uncanny Spider-Man, but getting to see another preview panel, even outside the preview that we checked out on stream, was also really, really fun. I think this book not only has great art, but just incredible, incredible colors. And we have an upcoming panel over for X-Men Red. We can see Storm interacting with John Ironfire. I feel like I'm a personal cheerleader for John Ironfire. Seeing him in one of these preview pages on X-Men Monday, very, very cool stuff. We also have an upcoming panel of Alpha Flight. I'll be honest, I haven't really stuck with Alpha Flight as closely as some of the other Fall of X titles. If you've been enjoying Alpha Flight, let me know in the comments. Oh boy, we all know that I'm really thrilled to check out the next issue of Dark X-Men to see Ben Reilly join alongside Madeline Pryor and fighting off some of those Orcus characters. I am very, very hyped over for this upcoming series. We have the next issue of Astonishing Iceman. This is actually a really great book. Krakoa, or rather Orcus right now, is really trying to cut off Iceman's relationship with Romeo. And I think right now is really trying to undo, all the good things he's done since the Hellfire Gala and really amplifying his resurrection here. Afro SF, I love Children of the Vault. Cable and Bishop have to work together even though they hate each other. Very entertaining book. Definitely agree, Afro SF. I think that's been just a phenomenal book. Miss Marvel, The New Mutants, also love this series. We had the chance to cover the most recent issue too. It kind of seemed like Kamala's cover was blown in the most recent issue. So watching her go up directly against the Stark Sentinels, pretty interesting. Also like the fact that Bruno is here and he's been featured so prominently in all these different Miss Marvel comics. Realm of X. I love Realm of X. I think it's a very distinctive, kind of off the beaten path book at Marvel with people like Magic, Dust, Curse, Marrow. We have Danny Moonstar over on this panel. Just really, really phenomenal work over from Toron Grandbeck and Diogenes Nevis. This looks like a panel over for X-Force where we can see Wolverine as well as Domino fighting as well. And this looks to be an upcoming panel for Wolverine, really showing off Black Panther in his new costume, going into action with Wolverine. And we have an upcoming panel over from the Jean Grey series. Looks like Madeline Pryor is going up against Jean Grey over on this teaser panel. Must be drawn by Bernard Chang. Really love the tense facial expressions that Bernard Chang delves into some of his art. Also great stuff, it looks like from Joshua Cassara on a future issue of X-Men 2. And we have a look over at Destiny as well. All right, so that's going to go ahead and do it over for our stream today. I want to thank everybody for stopping by, for hanging out. I know we covered just so much news today with touching on everything over from X-Men to Spider-Man and what's next over in the Marvel Universe. We're going to be back tomorrow. We're going to talk about the Titans Beast World. We're going to talk about the Avengers. We're also going to preview that upcoming brand new Thanos comic book. And I think the biggest news story that we didn't cover today was all of the brand new Ultimate X-Men material. We're going to be talking about that in a lot more depth very, very soon. Thank you so much for coming to check out our stream. And we'll be back in the very near future for a new stream tomorrow and some upcoming videos on Tuesday and Wednesday. Thank you for all the support, and I'll see you tomorrow to talk about the latest news over at Marvel and DC. Thanks so much, and I'll see you soon.